Katie Morrison sat on a broken stone wall and wiped the sweat from her face with the back of her hand. The ruins around her were old beyond imagination, and she was supposed to be watching for enemy movement, but there was nothing out here except dust and silence. Her squad was somewhere in the buildings behind her, checking for traps and making sure the area was safe. She kicked at a piece of rubble and watched it skitter across the ancient floor. These aliens had built cities that lasted 10,000 years, and humans could barely keep a building standing for 100. She laughed quietly at the thought, then something caught her eye. A stone tablet lay half buried in the dirt nearby. Katie walked over and pulled it free. It was heavy and covered in symbols that seemed to shimmer even in the dim light. The markings were beautiful and flowing like water frozen in stone. She turned it over in her hands, expecting to feel nothing but curiosity. Instead, she felt recognition. The symbols made sense to her. Katie blinked and looked again. The words were right there in her mind, as clear as if someone had written them in English. She could read every single character, and she knew exactly what they meant. Her heart started beating faster. Tablet spoke of something called the Scorching. It warned about a sealed vault beneath the city. It mentioned the sky turning black and stars going dark. Katie felt cold despite the heat. She set the tablet down carefully and stared at it. Why could she read this? No human should be able to read this far above the planet, in a ship that orbited among the stars. An elf woman named Sylvana. Night Whisper studied her own collection of tablets. She had been studying them for 300 years. 300 years of her long life spent trying to understand a single language. The first civilization had left these writings scattered across a dozen worlds. But no one could read them. Sylvana had violet eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. Her silver hair was tied back in a simple braid, and her fingers traced the symbols she had memorized long ago. She knew every curve, every line, every mark. But she did not know what they meant. Her dragon ember scale lay coiled in the cargo bay below. The beast was massive, with scales that glowed like cooling metal. His mind touched hers through their ancient bond, and she felt his patient amusement. He had been with her for 700 years. He had learned long ago that some puzzles took time. War between humans and the Korvax Empire had been raging for 5 years now. Sylvana cared little for either side. She was a scholar, not a soldier. But the humans had found several new tablets during their campaign on Viridian Prime, and they had asked her to come look at them. She had agreed, mostly because she had nothing better to do when her ship landed at the human forward base. Katie and her squad had just returned from the ruins. A young officer named Lieutenant Amy Sullivan told Katie to clean up because they had a meeting with some expert. Katie did not care much about meetings, but she tucked the tablet she had found into her pack. She wanted to show it to someone. The command tent was hot and crowded. Sylvana stood at the center, with 3 other elven scholars around her. They were examining tablets laid out on a long table. Human officers stood nearby, looking impatient. Elves did everything slowly, and humans always wanted answers. Immediately, Kati walked in late, still wearing her dusty combat gear. Amy gave her a sharp look, but Katie ignored it. She moved closer to see what everyone was studying. Her eyes went wide when she saw the tablets. They were just like the one in her pack. Sylvana was speaking in her musical accent about the complexity of the symbols and how they might represent both sound and meaning simultaneously. The other scholars nodded seriously. One of them suggested the markings could be mathematical rather than linguistic. Katie listened for about 30 seconds before she got bored. She pulled her tablet out and set it on the table next to the others. Everyone stopped talking. Zelvina turned slowly to look at the new tablet, and then at Katie. The elf said something in her own language that sounded like a question. Katie shrugged. One of the human commanders asked Katie where she found it, and she told him about the ruins. The commander seemed pleased and said something about securing the site. Katie was only half listening because she was reading the tablets on the table. One of them talked about ancient enemies. One talked about a weapon that could crack planets. One talked about someone called the Speaker, who had come from beyond the stars. Katie pointed at that one and said, "That tablet mentioned something about the Scorching too, just like hers." The tent went completely silent. Sylvana stepped closer. Her violet eyes were intense, and Katie felt like she was being examined under a microscope. The elf asked in careful English how Katie knew what the tablet said. Katie looked confused and said she could read it. Obviously, the symbols made sense. One of the elven scholars made a noise that might have been a laugh or a gasp. Sylvana held up a hand for silence. She picked up the tablet Katie had brought and held it up. Her voice was very controlled when she asked Katie to read it aloud. Katie took the tablet and started reading. She translated the flowing symbols into English without thinking about it. The words spoke of warning and danger. They told of a great sealing that had been done long ago. They said the vault beneath the city held secrets that must never be opened unless the speaker arrived. They said the speaker would know the truth when others saw only mystery. As Katie read, the tent grew colder, ember-scaled, far below, and the cargo bay lifted his enormous head. His golden eyes opened, and he released a low rumbling growl that made the ground shake. Everyone in the tent felt it in their bones. Katie finished reading and looked up. Everyone was staring at her. Sylvana set the tablet down very carefully. Her hands were shaking slightly, which seemed wrong because elves never seemed nervous. She asked Katie if she understood what she had just done. Katie said she had just read the tablet. What was the big deal? The elf took a breath and explained that scholars had been trying to translate that language for centuries, that her people had studied these tablets for longer than human civilization had existed, that the first civilization had vanished 10,000 years ago and taken all knowledge of their language with them. Katie felt her stomach drop. She asked if Sylvana was joking. The elf did not joke. Oh! She picked up another tablet and held it toward Katie. This one talked about prophecy. It spoke of the speaker from beyond the stars who would arrive when the galaxy stood at the edge of destruction. It said the speaker would read the ancient words as easily as breathing. It said the speaker would either save everything or doom everything. Katie read it all aloud. Her voice got quieter as she went. When she finished, Sylvana told her that according to the prophecy, Katie was either their salvation or their destruction. The elf did not sound happy about either option. Katie wanted to laugh, but her throat was too dry. Something had changed in that moment. Something huge and terrible and irreversible outside the tent. Emberscale roared, and the sound echoed across the entire base. Katie could not sleep that night. She lay in her bunk and stared at the ceiling while her mind raced. The tablets had been moved to a secure location, and she had been ordered to report to command. At dawn, she kept thinking about the prophecy, and the way Sylvana had looked at her like she was dangerous, like she was important. Katie did not want to be either. At dawn, she found herself assigned to work directly with the elven scholars. Her commanding officer did not look happy about it, but orders had come from higher up. The war effort needed every advantage, and apparently Katie was an advantage now. She felt like a tool instead of a person. Sylvana met her outside the command tent. The elf wore practical traveling clothes, and her silver hair was braided for movement. She told Katie they were going into the ruins beneath the old city to find the vault the tablets mentioned. Katie asked if that was safe, and Sylvana gave her a look that suggested safety was no longer a priority. Emberscale waited for them at the edge of the base. The dragon was even more massive up close. His scales gleamed red and gold and orange like a sunset made solid. His eyes were ancient and intelligent, and when he looked at Katie, she felt very small. He lowered his enormous head and made a sound like rocks grinding together. Sylvana touched the dragon and said he wanted to know if Katie was ready. Katie had no idea how to answer that question, so she just climbed onto Emberscale after the elf showed her where to sit. The dragon launched into the air with a power that pressed Katie back against his scales. They flew over the ruins, and Katie saw how vast the ancient city had been. Miles of broken structures and empty streets stretched in every direction. Whatever civilization had built this place had been mighty beyond measure now. It was just dust and memory. Emberscale landed near a massive opening in the ground that led down into darkness. Sylvana slid off the dragon and helped Katie down. She handed Katie a light pack and a weapon, and then started walking toward the opening. Katie followed because she did not know what else to do. The tunnels beneath the city were carved from solid stone. The walls were covered in more of the flowing symbols, and Katie could read all of them. They were directions and warnings. They spoke of danger and sacrifice. They said only the speaker could open the inner vault. Katie told Sylvana what they said, and the elf just nodded. Grimly, Emberscale barely fit in the tunnels. His bulk scraped against the walls, and his breathing echoed in the confined space, but he pushed forward with them. His presence was both comforting and terrifying. Katie wondered what it would be like to have a companion for 700 years to know something so completely as they descended. Katie started feeling strange, her head hurt, and she saw flashes of things that were not there. Great ships burning in space, worlds cracking open, a darkness between stars that swallowed light. She stumbled, and Sylvana caught her arm. The elf asked if she was all right. Katie said she was seeing things. Visions, maybe. Sylvana went very still. She asked what kind of visions. Katie described them, and the elf looked troubled. She said those sounded like ancestral memories, like the kind of thing elves sometimes experienced when they touched ancient places. But humans did not have ancestral memories. Humans lived too briefly, their lines were too shortened. Less Katie was not entirely human anymore. Katie did not like that idea at all. She pushed forward, trying to ignore the visions, but they got stronger. The deeper they went, the more she saw. She saw the first civilization in their glory, beings of light, and thought, who shaped reality with their will. She saw them fighting something terrible, something that came from outside the galaxy and consumed everything in its path. She saw them lose the vault door, appeared suddenly in the tunnel ahead. It was massive and covered in symbols that glowed faintly in the darkness. Sylvana approached it carefully and ran her hands over the markings. She had seen doors like this before, doors that no one could open no matter what they tried. Katie walked up to the door and read the symbols aloud without thinking. The words came naturally, like breathing, like her heart beating. The door recognized her voice and began to open. Sylvana stepped back quickly. Emberscale growled, low and deep. The sound of ancient mechanisms grinding filled the tunnel, and then the vault was open before them. Lights spilled out, blue and cold and utterly alien. Inside was a chamber so vast Katie could not see the far walls. Crystalline structures rose from the floor like trees made of frozen light. Holographic displays floated in the air, showing star maps and data streams that moved too fast to follow. In the center of it all was a raised platform with a control system that looked like it had been waiting for 10,000 years. Katie walked toward it in a daze. Sylvana called after her to be careful, but Katie could not stop. The symbols on the control system were calling to her. They wanted to be read. They wanted to be understood. She touched the crystal surface and knowledge flooded into her mind. The truth hit her like a physical blow. The Korvax Empire was not the real enemy. They were running from something. The first civilization had not vanished. They had sealed themselves away, along with creatures called the Devourers, beings that existed to consume all matter and energy in the universe. The seals were failing. The Devourers were waking in. Katie was supposed to stop them. She turned to tell Sylvana and found the elf staring at something behind her. Katie spun around and saw soldiers in Korvax armor pouring into the vault. Their weapons were raised and their leader was shouting orders. Katie recognized him from intelligence briefings. Commander Vex Kane, the most dangerous soldier in the Korvax military. He had been hunting Sylvana for decades. Burskel roared and unleashed a torrent of flame that turned 3 Korvax soldiers to ash, but more kept coming. Plasma bolts filled the air, and Sylvana was moving, drawing her own weapon and firing with precision. Katie dove behind a crystal structure as the vault became a battlefield. Something inside her responded to the danger words came to her lips. Symbols from the vault wall that she had only glanced at. She spoke them without thinking in 3 Korvax. Soldiers simply stopped existing, their atoms scattered across dimensions that Katie could not name. The air where they had stood shimmered and twisted. Everyone stopped firing. Sylvana was staring at Katie with an expression of horror and awe. Vex Kane was shouting into his communicator for reinforcements. Emberscale was bleeding from a plasma wound in his side, but his eyes were locked on. Katie spoke again, different words this time. A shield of pure force expanded around her and Sylvana. Plasma bolts hit it and dissolved into nothing. Katie felt power flowing through her, like she had tapped into something vast and old and utterly inhuman. The vault started to shake. Vex Kane screamed for his soldiers to fall back. The ceiling began to crack. Emberscale stumbled, and Sylvana ran to him. The dragon was hurt badly. The plasma had burned deep into his ancient scales. He would not survive the escape. Katie made a choice. She ran to the dragon and placed her hands on his massive head. Words of power came to her, words that froze time itself. She spoke them clearly and watched as crystal began to form around Emberscale. The dragon tried to resist, but Katie kept speaking. The crystal spread until it covered him completely, preserving Him, in a moment of frozen time, Sylvana screamed. She grabbed Katie and shook her, demanding to know what she had done. Katie said she saved him, that he was alive and there waiting, that when they found a way to heal him, they could bring him back. Elf looked at her dragon encased in crystal, and something broke in her eyes. She released Katie and turned away. Her hands were shaking. Imberscale had been with her for 700 years. He was more than a companion. He was part of her soul. The vault collapsed behind them. As they ran, Vex Kane and his soldiers were buried in the rubble. Katie and Sylvana barely made it out. They emerged into daylight covered in dust and blood, and crystal fragments. Sylvan did not speak to Katie for 3 days. The human military command was very interested in what Katie could do. Admiral Lisa Chen wanted demonstrations. She wanted Katie to show what the ancient language could accomplish. Katie stood in a testing facility and spoke words that made matter. Reshape itself? She created shields and weapons and tools that defied physics. Every time she used the power, something changed in her. Her eyes started to glow faintly, the same blue light as the vault symbols. She stopped feeling hungry. She stopped feeling tired. Sleep became unnecessary energy from the language itself sustained. Herdiar Maya Rodriguez ran tests on Katie every day. The doctor was fascinated and terrified. She told Katie that her DNA was changing, that something was rewriting her. Biology at the molecular level. Katie asked if it could be stopped. Maya said she did not know. Maybe not. Sylvana watched from a distance. The elf had brought Imberscale encased in his crystal back to the human base. The dragon stood frozen in the cargo bay, a monument to what Katie had done. Sylvana visited him every day. She touched the crystal and whispered in her own language. Katie did not need to understand the words to know they were apologies. The war turned in humanity's favor. With Katie's help, they brought her more tablets, and she translated them. Each translation revealed new technology, new weapons, new defenses. The Korvax forces began to retreat across multiple fronts. Human casualties dropped by half, but Katie was disappearing. She looked in the mirror one morning and barely recognized herself. Her skin had taken on a faint luminescence. Her hair moved like it was underwater, even when there was no wind. Her eyes were completely blue now. No pupils, no iris, just light. She tried to talk to Amy about it, but her old commanding officer did not know what to say. Amy looked at Katie like she was already gone. It's like she was looking at a ghost or a god instead of the woman who used to share rations with her. Sylvana finally approached Katie in the cargo bay, where Imberscale stood frozen. The elf looked tired. She said she had been studying the prophecy more carefully, reading and rereading every translation, that there were parts written in a dialect so old even she could barely understand them. She told Katie the truth. That command did not want to hear the speaker in the prophecy did not save the galaxy by fighting the speaker, saved it by becoming the seal itself, by speaking words of unmaking that would scatter their consciousness across all of space and time to become a living barrier against the devourers. Katie would have to die. Not just die, she would cease to exist as an individual. Her mind would be stretched across eternity, conscious, but alone forever. Katie sat down slowly. She asked if there was another way. Sylvana hesitated and then said, maybe the alternative ending was vague. It suggested that if someone who loved the speaker shared the burden, they could become the seal together, 2 souls instead of one, never alone, but it would require the same sacrifice from both of them. Katie looked at the frozen dragon and then at Sylvana. She asked if the elf would really do that, give up everything to keep Katie company in the void. Sylvana did not answer right away. She touched the crystal containing Imberscale, and her violet eyes were distant. She said, Imberscale carried something important in his heart. A piece of the first civilization bloodline, the final syllable needed to complete the words of unmaking. They would need to wake him to finish Thesa. Massive Korvax fleet appeared in the system the next day. The flagship was called Eternal Darkness, and it carried enough firepower to crack the planet. Katie was brought to the bridge. In order to use her power, she spoke, and Korvax ships folded in on themselves. She spoke again, and their shields turned to vapor, but each word took more from her. She was becoming less solid, less real. Admiral Chen kept ordering her to continue, and Katie obeyed because she did not know how to refuse. The power was intoxicating and terrible. She could feel herself slipping away into the language, while Vana made her decision in that moment. She had spent 300 years studying the dead language, while Katie had simply understood it. In an instant, she had spent 700 years with Imberscale, while Katie had known the dragon for mere days. Nothing about this was fair, but fair did not matter anymore. The elf broke into the secure, a facility where Imberscale Crystal Prison was kept. She used forbidden blood magic that her people had not practiced in millennia. Her own blood drew symbols on the floor, and she chanted in a voice that made reality tremble. She touched Imberscale. Mind where he dreamed in frozen time? The dragon showed her the complete prophecy, the parts that had been hidden, the parts that only his ancient memory preserved. The speaker and the scholar and the dragon were meant to act as one, three voices too. Speak the words of unmaking three souls, to become the seal. They had all been part of this from the beginning. Sylvana opened her eyes. She knew what had to be done. She sent a message to Katie on an encrypted channel, 3 words in the ancient language. Katie understood them immediately. They meant, "We finished this together, Sylvana." Stole Korbak's stealth ship from the captured vessels in the hangar. She loaded Imberscale crystal onto it, along with supplies and weapons. Then she went to find Katitha. Human was on the bridge still, speaking words of destruction, still watching ships die. Admiral Chen did not want to let her go, but Sylvana had stopped asking permission centuries ago. She grabbed Katie's hand and pulled her toward the exit. Security tried to stop them. Katie spoke a single word, and the door ceased to exist. She was so far gone now that reality itself bent around her. Sylvana had to guide her like a sleepwalker. They ran through corridors while alarms blared behind them. They reached the stolen ship and launched before anyone could lock down the hangar. Bay doors exploded outward, and they were in space, flying toward the edge of creation. Both human and Korbak's fleets would follow eventually. Both sides wanted the power. Katie represented, but for now they were free. Katie sat in the co-pilot seat and looked at her hands. They were translucent. She could see stars through her fingers. She asked Sylvana how much time she had left. The elf did not lie. She said not long. Maybe days, maybe hours. The transformation was accelerating. Katie nodded slowly, then she smiled. It was a strange expression on a face that was barely human anymore. She said at least she would not be alone at the end. Sylvana gripped the controls and pushed the ship faster toward the edge. They would wake Imberscale. They would speak the words. They would become something new together. The darkness between stars was waiting. The journey to the edge of creation took them through regions of space that had been marked forbidden on every star chart. The dead zones, they were called, places where the devourers had already begun to stir. Katie watched through the viewport. As they passed a solar system that was coming apart at the seams, the planets orbited nothing. The star that should have been at the center was gone. It's not destroyed, but erased. The space where it had existed was wrong somehow, empty in a way that hurt. To look at Sylvana said the devourers did not consume matter the way fire consumes. Would they unmade it, reduced it to less than nothing? Katie could barely speak anymore. Her voice came out in harmonics that were not quite sound when she tried to say. She understood 3 different versions of her voice, overlapped, each saying something slightly different. Sylvana pretended not to notice how disturbing it was. They found a refugee ship drifting in one of the dead zones. Sylvana brought them alongside, and they boarded to look for survivors. The ship was Korbak's, but it was empty. The crew was gone, but not dead. The walls were covered in handprints that faded into and out of existence like they existed in multiple dimensions at once. Katie touched one of the handprints and suddenly knew what had happened. The devourers had scattered these people across infinite parallel realities. They existed everywhere and nowhere, unable to die, unable to live, just consciousness stretched impossibly. Then she pulled her hand back, and her fingers left their own fading prints on the wall. Sylvana got them back to their ship quickly. They did not talk about what they had seen. There was nothing to say. The alternative to their sacrifice was this: an eternity of scattered existence for everyone in the galaxy. Katie had thought becoming the seal would be terrible, but at least she would still be herself in some way. These people were not even that. Any Miriam Burskell crystal stood in the cargo hold, filling most of the available space. Sylvana visited him every few hours. She would touch the crystal and whisper updates about their journey. Sometimes she cried silently. Katie saw her once and backed away to give her privacy. Even immortals needed time to grieve. The elf found Katie on the bridge 3 days into their journey and told her they were not alone anymore. Ships were following them. Lots of them. Sylvana brought up the sensor display, and Katie saw 2 fleets converging on their position, human vessels led by Captain Amy Sullivan and Korvax's ships, under the command of someone new. Vex Kane had survived the vault collapse. He was coming for them. Sylvana asked if Katie wanted to run or fight. Katie tried to say neither, but the words came out wrong. She concentrated hard and managed to say in almost normal speech that maybe some of them wanted to help, and maybe they deserved to know the truth. So Sylvana opened a communication channel to both fleets. Sami appeared on one screen, looking tired and determined. She said she was not letting Katie face this alone, that whatever was happening, she wanted to be there. Vex Kane appeared on another screen. The Korvax commander looked different now, less aggressive, more desperate. He told them something that changed everything. The Korvax were not conquerors, they were refugees. Their home galaxy had already fallen to the Devourers 300 years ago. They had fled to this galaxy, hoping to find safety instead. They found the same ancient evil stirring. They had been fighting humanity because they needed resources to keep running. To keep their people alive just a little longer, he had been hunting Sylvana, because elven scholars were the only ones who might know how to read the first civilization language, how to find the weapons that could fight the Devourers. When he learned about Katie, he had tried to capture her for the same reason. Now he understood the prophecy. He had scholars of his own who had pieced together fragments. Vex Kane knew what Katie had to do, and he was asking if there was any other way. Katie managed to shake her head. The motion left after images in the air, 3 versions of her head moving at slightly different times. She was running out of time to be one person. That was when the last piece of the puzzle arrived. A ship appeared that was like nothing any of them had seen before. It was not made of matter exactly. More like solidified thought. It broadcast a message in the ancient language that only Katie could understand fully. The last scholar of the first civilization had arrived. The entity that called itself the last scholar was not alive in any normal sense 10,000 years ago, when the first civilization made their final stand. They had uploaded the consciousness of their greatest minds into quantum storage. The scholar was the only one who remained functional after millennia of isolation, watching and waiting. It came aboard their ship as a hologram of light and data. Its form shifted constantly, never settling on one shape. It spoke directly into Katie's mind in the ancient language, and she translated for the others. The scholar told them the complete truth. The words of unmaking would work. They would seal the Devourers away, but the speaker would indeed cease to exist as an individual. Their consciousness scattered across space-time as a living barrier. The prophecy alternative ending was real too. If multiple souls spoke together, they could share the burden, exist together in the seal. But there was something the prophecy did not mention clearly. The words required a spark. The primal fire that ignited the first stars in Burscale carried that fire in his dragon heart. He was descended from the first civilization, great beasts, the ones who had burned with the fire of creation itself. Without him, the words would be incomplete. The seal would fail. All 3 of them had to do this together. Human, elf, and dragon. Sylvana looked at the crystal containing Imberscale, and her face showed the weight of 700 years. She had already decided to join Katie in the void. But asking Imberscale to make that choice, asking him to give up his existence, the scholar told them there was no time left. The Devourers were fully waking. The dead zones were expanding. Human and Korvax fleets were detecting reality failures across dozens of systems. If they did not act within days, the galaxy would begin to unravel. Katie felt herself fragmenting. Further, she existed in 3 places at once, now sitting in the chair, standing by the wall, looking out the viewport. All 3 versions of her turned to Sylvana and spoke in harmony. They had to wake the dragons. Sylvana performed the ritual that night with Katie and the scholar present. She used the last of her blood magic, and the symbols she drew on the floor glowed with power that made the ship systems flicker. The crystal around Imberscale began to crack. The dragon emerged slowly, his massive form unfolding as time resumed for him. His golden eyes opened, and he looked around confused. Then he saw Sylvana, and his mind touched hers through their bond. He understood instantly what had happened while he slept. He saw Katie fragmenting. Into multiple versions, he saw the scholar hologram. He felt the wrongness in space beyond the ship, the way reality itself was coming apart. He looked at Sylvana, and she showed him everything through their bond. The prophecy, the choice, the sacrifice. Bursel was silent for a long moment, then he made a sound that was part roar, part song. It shook the ship, and everyone in both fleets felt it in their bones. The scholar translated for those who could not understand. The dragon said he had lived for 1,000 years. He had seen wonders and horrors beyond counting. He had fought in wars and loved deeply and learned the meaning of friendship. He had watched civilizations rise and fall, had carried Sylvana through centuries of life. He said he was ready. He said if his fire could save the galaxy, then let it burn one final time. Katie felt tears on her face, even though she was barely solid enough to cry anymore. Sylvana pressed her forehead against Imberscale's massive head, and they stayed that way for a long time, 700 years of companionship, ending in a choice to continue together in a new form. Fleets escorted them to the edge of creation, humans and Korvax flying side by side for the first time. Amy sent Katie a final message. She said she was proud to have served with her, that humanity would remember what she did. Vex Kane sent his own message, said the Korvax would honor the sacrifice. He said, "May the void be kind to them." Katie looked at Sylvana and Imberscale and tried to smile. She existed in 5 places now, barely holding herself together. But she was not alone. She would never be alone. They approached the nexus point where reality was thinnest, where the words would carry the furthest, and waiting therein. The darkness between stars were the devourers. They were beautiful and terrible, vast beyond comprehension, bending gravity with their mere presence. Their hunger was so intense it pulled light toward them before it could escape. Stars near them were already dying, going dark as their energy was consumed. Both fleets formed a defensive perimeter, knowing most would not survive. Katie, Sylvana, and Imberscale prepared for the final act. The scholar told them when they were ready, "Speak as one, let their voices become harmony. Let their souls intertwine, the words of unmaking would do the rest." Katie took Sylvana's hand. The elf placed her other hand on Imberscale. The dragon spread his wings, and his fire began to build in his chest. Katie could feel them both. Through a connection deeper than thought, 3 souls preparing to become one. The devourers noticed them. Ships near the nexus point began to fail as the creatures turned their attention toward the gathered fleets. Reality itself bent and twisted, hull plating, aged 1,000 years in seconds. Crews phased between dimensions, their screams echoing across multiple realities at once. Captain Amy Sullivan ordered her ships to open fire, knowing it would do nothing. Plasma and missiles and railgun rounds struck the devourers and simply ceased to exist. The energy feeding, something that could never be filled. Vex Kane fleet joined the attack, not to win but to buy time. Katie stood at the nexus point with Sylvana beside her and Imberscale at their backs. She existed in 10 places, now 2050. Her consciousness was spreading, but the elf hand in hers kept her grounded, kept her focused. The scholar hologram appeared one last time, told them the words in the ancient language. It's the syllables that would reshape reality, the sounds that had no translation, because they existed before language, before meaning. They were pure creation and pure destruction merged into one. Katie began to speak. Her voice was a choir now. Every version of her overlapping. Sylvana joined her. The elf had spent 300 years studying this language, and now she understood it, not with her mind, but with her soul. Imberscale added his voice, the dragon song that was older than words. The fire that had burned when the first stars ignited. 3 voices became one. The words of unmaking echoed across space and time. They did not travel at the speed of light. They existed everywhere simultaneously. The devourers recoiled as the sound touched them. For the first time in their existence, they felt something other than hunger. They felt pain. Katie felt herself coming apart. Her body dissolved into light, into thought, into pure consciousness. She was everywhere and nowhere. She was the space between atoms, the pause between heartbeats, the silence between sounds. She screamed, but had no mouth. She reached out, but had no hands. Then she felt Sylvana beside her. The elf was there in the dissolution, her consciousness intertwining with Katie's own. 2 souls refusing to separate, even as they scattered across infinity. And Imberscale was there too, the dragon fire burning, eternal. his presence vast and warm and unchanging. He had been ancient when he lived now. He was timeless. The words continued to reshape reality. The Devourers were not destroyed. Katie understood that now they could not be destroyed. They were part of the universe just as much as matter and energy, but they could be contained. Sealed away in a prison made of living consciousness, Katie and Sylvana and Emberscale became that prison they stretched across. Light years across dimensions, their awareness touched every point in space. Simultaneously, they felt stars burning and planets turning. They felt the thoughts of every living being like whispers in the dark. They were the fabric of reality itself, now woven into existence as the barrier between the Devourers and everything else. It should have been agony. It should have been loneliness beyond comprehension. But they were together. Katie felt Sylvana thoughts intertwined with her own, the elf. Wonder and curiosity and fierce determination, centuries of knowledge and wisdom flowing between them like water. She felt Emberscaled ancient strength, his patient eternal presence, the warmth of his fire that would never go out. They spoke to each other not in words but in pure meaning. They were individual and united, separate and together. They existed across all of time, which meant they could touch any moment. Katie reached back to the battle at the edge of creation and whispered courage into the minds of the human crews. They felt it as a warmth in their hearts, as determination in their souls. Sylvana reached forward through time and left wisdom for those who would seek it, her knowledge appearing in the minds of scholars and artists across the galaxy. Emberscale fire became the spark of hope, the feeling that made people stand up after falling down, that made them try again after failure. The battle ended. The Devourers sealed away. The fleet stood down. Amy Sullivan looked out at the stars and felt tears on her face. She did not know why, but she knew Katie was still there somewhere. Vex Kane ordered his ships to stand down. The war between humans and Korvax ended in that moment, united by witnessing the greatest sacrifice any of them had ever seen. They built monuments at the edge of creation, statues of a human woman, an elf, and a dragon, stone and metal shaped into memory, so the galaxy would never forget. Back on Viridian Prime in the ruins, where Katie had first found the tablet, new inscriptions appeared overnight. They told the story of the speaker, the scholar, and the dragon, not as myth, but as truth, written in the ancient language and in a dozen modern tongues, so everyone could understand the inscriptions. Said that Katie Morrison had been a soldier who became a savior, that Sylvana Nightwhisper had been a scholar who became a guardian, that Emberscale had been a dragon who became eternal. They said the three were still there, watching, waiting, ready to help those who called out in darkness. And it was true. Across the galaxy, people began to report strange experiences. So scientists stuck on an impossible problem would suddenly understand the solution and swear they heard an elf voice whisper the answer. A soldier pinned down by enemy fire would feel a warmth in their chest and find the courage to keep fighting. Child lost and afraid would see golden light in the darkness leading them home. The galaxy changed. Humans and Korvax formed an alliance. They explored together, built together, learned from each other. The war that had raged for 5 years became a partnership that would last for centuries. Sometimes on quiet nights, people would look up at the stars and feel a presence, something vast and kind and watchful. 3 souls intertwined across infinity, standing guard against the darkness. Katie could feel all of it. She existed in every moment, past, present, and future. Simultaneously, she saw herself as a child playing in dirt. She saw herself as an old woman, though she would never age. She saw herself scattered across the cosmos, and she was not afraid because Sylvana was there. The elf consciousness wrapped around her, sharing every experience, every thought. They talked across eternity and never ran out of things to say. 300 years of life had given Sylvana endless stories, and now she had forever to share them, and Emberscale was there, the dragon fire burning steady and warm, his ancient patience, teaching them both how to exist in this new form. He had lived for 1,000 years. He knew how to endure. He showed them how together they were, the seal they held back, the Devourers. They protected the galaxy. They watched over the civilizations that grew and changed and evolved. They were everywhere and nowhere. They were the language itself, the symbols that had started everything, the words that Katie had read so easily that first day in the ruins. They were the answer to the mystery scholars had studied the dead language for centuries, yet Katie had read it like it was today's newspaper, because it was not a dead language. It was living, waiting, preparing for the moment when the speaker would arrive, and now the speaker, the scholar, and the dragon were part of that language forever. Sylvana sent a thought to Katie, asking if she had any regrets. Katie thought about it. She had given up her body, her life, her future as a human, but she had gained something impossible. She had become part of something greater. She would exist forever, watching over people she would never meet, protecting them from horrors they would never know existed. She had Sylvana, whose wisdom and warmth filled the void she had embirscled, whose fire would never let them feel cold or alone. She sent back her answer, no regrets. This was exactly where she was meant to be. The dragon laughed, the sound echoing across dimensions. Stars burned a little brighter in response, and somewhere on a small planet, a young girl picked up a stone tablet covered in flowing symbols. She looked at them and felt a warmth in her chest, a whisper in her mind telling her she could understand if she tried. The language was alive, and it was waiting for her. Katie smiled. Without a face across infinity, she felt Sylvana smile too. An ember-scaled fire blazed with joy. Their story had ended, but it had also just begun. The galaxy would remember, the monuments would stand, the inscriptions would guide new generations, and three souls would watch over it all forever, together, never alone. In the space between stars, in the silence between heartbeats, in the pause between moments, they existed, they endured, they protected, and they were happy.